My name is Emma, and I'm 32. What happened next still echoes, a bizarre, surreal pronouncement that reshaped everything. Late at night, the silence stretches, and I wonder if I dreamt it all. The invitation to my great-aunt Beatrice's will reading arrived. I barely knew her, a faint memory from a single childhood summer. She was a reclusive soul, her Christmas cards offering little more than a greeting and a sharp signature. My expectations were minimal. The reading was in a stately, hushed law office. The air, thick with unspoken agreements, smelled of polished wood and old paper. Heavy velvet curtains framed tall windows overlooking a bustling city street, a stark contrast to the somber formality. I anticipated the usual. A small antique locket, a faded photograph, maybe a polite, formal letter. Nothing substantial, nothing to anchor me to a past I'd never been part of. Mr. Finch, his face set in polite gravitas, cleared his throat, adjusting his spectacles. He looked at me, his gaze analytical. Miss Hayes, thank you for coming. His voice was low, measured, devoid of discernible emotion. I sat opposite him at a vast, gleaming mahogany table, hands clasped. Distant cousins, bewildered, were present, eyeing each other, hoping for a trinket. He began reading, his voice a droning cadence, listing bequests. My mind wandered, drifting to my mental to-do list, mundane tasks outside. I was ready for a small sum for family mementos, or a final dismissal. Then, his voice shifted, subtly, imperceptibly, reaching the document's core. To my great-niece, Emma Hayes. My attention snapped back, a sudden, sharp jolt. This was it. The predictable. I leaned forward, bracing for the anticlimax, but the words that followed were not what I expected. They were a deliberate, almost cruel twist. He continued, I bequeath the entirety of my estate, including the house and all the surrounding land. A gasp, sharp and sudden, cut through the lawyer's measured words. It wasn't mine, not yet, but from the cousins, their collective breath catching. My own mind struggled to process, to reconcile the casual pronouncement with its monumental implications. The house? All? The land? My great-aunt Beatrice, a woman I barely knew, had just bequeathed me a life I couldn't even fathom. A heavy silence descended, thick with disbelief, before shattering into a chorus of agitated murmurs. That's impossible! A woman with a harsh, reedy voice, one of the cousins I vaguely recalled as Aunt Carol, burst out, her face flushed crimson. Beatrice promised me her china and the summer cabin to my son, David. Her indignation hung in the air, a visible cloud. Other voices joined in, a cacophony of offended sensibilities and perceived injustices. They were pointing, their fingers trembling with accusation, not at Mr. Finch, but at me. I felt their resentment, a burning, palpable heat. Mr. Finch remained impassive, his gaze unwavering as he looked over the rim of his glasses. He waited patiently for the storm to subside, a human anchor in the swirling chaos. The will has been duly executed and witnessed, he stated, his voice regaining its low, firm quality, cutting through the rising tide of protests. It is legally binding. The details of the estate are extensive, Miss Hayes, and will require a private consultation. He subtly steered the conversation back to me, an unexpected island in their ocean of fury. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of confusion and a strange, nascent fear. This was not the quiet, discreet exit I'd anticipated. This was an earthquake, shaking the very foundations of my small, carefully constructed life. I glanced at Aunt Carol, her eyes narrowing into slits, and another cousin, a man named George, whose jaw was clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. Their animosity was a physical weight, pressing down on me. What about us? George demanded, his voice thick with outrage. We're her blood, her closest living relatives. We spent holidays with her. He gestured wildly around the room, encompassing the aggrieved family members. It was true. They were closer, had been present in Beatrice's life in ways I hadn't. Yet, she had chosen me, a near stranger. The irony was a bitter taste on my tongue. Beatrice's final wishes were clear. Mr. Finch reiterated, his tone carrying an edge of finality now. She left a detailed letter of instruction, along with the will. I am required to discuss the specifics with Miss Hayes alone, as per the testator's wishes. He stood, signaling the end of the public spectacle, his movements crisp and decisive. The room, though still seething, began to empty, the cousins reluctantly shuffling out, their disgruntled whispers echoing down the hallway. I felt a sudden, profound isolation. As the last disgruntled relative vanished, leaving behind only the scent of their fading anger, a silence fell, deeper and more profound than before. Mr. Finch settled back into his chair, a faint sigh escaping his lips. Aunt Beatrice was an eccentric woman, Miss Hayes, he began, a rare hint of something akin to weariness in his voice. Her instructions were very precise. There's a great deal to discuss. My mind raced, trying to comprehend the magnitude of what had just happened. A house and all the land. What did that even mean? Was it a small plot or something vast? He picked up a thick, leather-bound folder. The property is quite substantial. It's located upstate, a significant distance from here. A very large old house and several hundred acres of land, some forested, some open fields. My breath hitched. Hundreds of acres? This wasn't a memento. It was an inheritance that could redefine my entire existence. The weight of it, the sheer unimaginable scale, settled upon me, heavy and disorienting. I had walked into a will reading expecting a trifle, and walked out burdened by an entire world. My mind felt like a storm-tossed sea, waves of disbelief crashing against the shore of reality. Hundreds of acres? I finally managed to whisper, the words feeling alien on my tongue, as if they belonged to someone else's life. Mr. Finch nodded, his expression softening slightly, a flicker of something almost sympathetic in his eyes. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the gleaming table, pushing the folder slightly closer to me. Indeed, Miss Hayes, it's a place called Blackwood Manor. The family has owned it for generations. Beatrice lived there her entire adult life, virtually isolated. He paused, allowing the information to sink in. It's a significant responsibility. The house itself is quite old, Victorian era, and has not seen extensive modern renovations. The land, well, it's a small ecosystem unto itself. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. An ecosystem. My life, until this moment, had been neatly contained within a modest city apartment, my days filled with the quiet hum of design software and the occasional crowded coffee shop. This was a wilderness, a sprawling, untamed beast compared to my meticulously organized existence. But why me? I asked, the question escaping like a fragile, lost bird. I barely knew her. Her other relatives, Aunt Carol, George, they were genuinely part of her life. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Mr. Finch's lips, quickly vanishing. That is precisely what the letter addresses, Miss Hayes. Aunt Beatrice was a woman of particular convictions. She stipulated in great detail why she chose you. He tapped the folder. The letter is to be read by you, alone, at the property itself. That was a firm condition of her will. My eyebrows furrowed. Alone? At the property? So I have to go there? The thought of this enormous, old, potentially dilapidated house, far from anything familiar, sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool office air. It sounded like something out of a Gothic novel, not a legal inheritance. What kind of strange conditions would a reclusive woman impose? It is required, yes, he confirmed, his voice firm again. The will dictates that you must reside there for a minimum of 6 months to fully inherit. If you fail to do so, the estate reverts to a charitable trust. She also made provisions for a caretaker, a Mr. Silas Thorne, who has been looking after the property for years. He will be your initial point of contact. Reside there for 6 months? A caretaker? This was beyond a simple inheritance. It was an imposition, a directive from beyond the grave. My neatly planned life, my job, my friends, all of it seemed to shrink, fading into insignificance beside this colossal, unexpected demand. And if I don't want it? I asked, the words barely audible, a desperate attempt to cling to the normalcy that was rapidly slipping away. Mr. Finch's expression became grave. That is your prerogative, of course. But you would be relinquishing an estate valued in the tens of millions. It's an immense legacy, Miss Hayes, one that could secure your future and that of generations to come. He leaned back, his eyes searching mine. Are you certain you wish to walk away without even understanding her reasons, without seeing what she left you? His words hung in the air, weighted with the enormity of the choice. Tens of millions. It was a sum so vast it felt abstract, unreal. The sheer scale of it was dizzying. Could I truly turn my back on such a gift, even with its peculiar strings attached? The city, with its familiar rhythms and comfortable anonymity, suddenly seemed small, almost stifling. A strange curiosity began to stir within me, a flicker of intrigue amidst the fear. What secrets did Aunt Beatrice hold that led her to this extreme decision? And what would I find in that house, on those hundreds of acres, that she felt compelled to send me there? The question hung in the air, a silent challenge, resonating with an almost hypnotic pull. Tens of millions. Blackwood Manor. 6 months. My mind replayed Mr. Finch's words, each phrase a hammer blow against the comfortable walls of my routine. My small apartment, my steady job as a graphic designer, the familiar faces of my few friends, they all seemed to shrink, fading into a monochrome backdrop against the vibrant, terrifying canvas of this new possibility. Was I truly prepared to dismiss a future so utterly grand, so irrevocably transformative, simply because it felt too big? Too strange? Miss Hayes? Mr. Finch prompted, his voice gentle now, as if sensing the internal maelstrom. This is a great deal to absorb, I understand. Perhaps you'd like some time? To consider? He gestured towards the door, offering an escape. But walking away meant abandoning the flicker of curiosity that had ignited within me, the whisper of adventure that dared to suggest my life wasn't as fulfilling as I pretended. I looked at him, really looked, past the polished lawyer persona to the man who had just delivered this bomb. No, I said, the word surprising even myself with its firmness. No, I think I need to understand it now. What are the practicalities? My job, my apartment. This isn't a small trip. A nervous laugh escaped me, thin and reedy. This is a whole new life. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Indeed, Aunt Beatrice anticipated such concerns. She made provisions for a substantial stipend to cover your expenses during the 6-month residency, including any costs associated with relocating or storing your belongings. She was nothing if not thorough. He pushed a document across the table. This outlines the financial details. It's more than generous. And as for your current employment, she even included a clause about compensation for lost wages should you need to take an extended leave or, indeed, leave permanently. My eyes widened as I scanned the figures. It wasn't just generous. It was staggering. Enough to live comfortably for years, even without the eventual inheritance. Aunt Beatrice, it seemed, wasn't just eccentric. She was meticulous, even manipulative, in ensuring her wishes were followed. It felt less like a gift and more like a carefully baited trap, albeit one lined with silk and gold. And this caretaker? I asked, trying to steer away from the dizzying sums. Silas Thorne. What kind of person is he? Is he reliable? The idea of being alone in a vast old house with a stranger, hundreds of miles from anyone I knew, stirred a fresh wave of unease. My imagination, always vivid, conjured scenarios from horror films. Mr. Finch's lips twitched slightly, a ghost of a smile. Silas has been with the estate for over 20 years. He was devoted to Aunt Beatrice. He's a man of few words, but utterly dependable. He knows Blackwood Manor intimately, every creak and groan. He'll be your guide, your first point of contact, and an invaluable resource for understanding the property and its unique demands. He paused, then added, He's also quite reclusive himself, much like Beatrice was. I believe they understood each other well. A reclusive caretaker for a reclusive owner. It painted a picture of a world far removed from my own, a world where silence stretched, and secrets perhaps bloomed in neglected corners. The thought was both unsettling and strangely compelling. It was a chance to step outside my meticulously curated existence, to plunge into the unknown. A part of me, the adventurous spirit I often suppressed, began to stir, tentatively. "All right," I finally said, the word a quiet exhale. "All right, Mr. Finch. I'll do it. I'll go to Blackwood Manor." The weight of the decision settled, not crushing, but solid, tangible. It was a leap of faith into a void, but at least this void was paved with good intentions and an unimaginable fortune. I had no idea what awaited me, but the alternative, walking away from this grand, strange legacy, felt like a betrayal, not just of Aunt Beatrice's memory, but of a latent part of myself. He offered a rare, genuine smile, a flash of warmth in his otherwise reserved demeanor. "Excellent, Miss Hayes. I believe you've made a wise decision. I'll arrange for the property to be opened and for Mr. Thorne to be aware of your arrival. We can schedule a time for you to sign the initial documents and receive the keys." He then pulled out a large, ornate key from the folder, placing it on the table between us. It looked ancient, heavy, almost ceremonial, nothing like the sleek, modern keys to my apartment. I picked it up, feeling its cool weight in my palm. It was the key to Blackwood Manor, to hundreds of acres, to a future I couldn't yet comprehend. It felt real now, impossibly real. I spent the next few days in a blur of packing, informing my baffled landlord, and explaining a simplified version of events to my friends. They were a mix of envious, worried, and fascinated. My boss, surprisingly understanding, granted me a 6-month sabbatical, intrigued by the family emergency I vaguely described. The morning I left, the city felt different, smaller, its familiar hum a distant echo. My car, packed to the brim with essentials and a vague sense of dread and excitement, pointed north. As the skyline receded in my rearview mirror, I felt a peculiar blend of freedom and apprehension. I was leaving everything I knew behind, driving towards a destiny shaped by a woman I barely remembered, clutching a heavy, archaic key. Blackwood Manor. The name itself felt like a whisper of secrets, a promise of revelation. I had no idea if I was driving towards a dream or a nightmare, but I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that my life would never be the same. The long drive was a meditation in motion, a relentless unspooling of asphalt and ever-changing scenery. The cityscape I knew so intimately slowly melted away, replaced by rolling hills, then dense stretches of forest, their leaves a riot of late summer green. My initial apprehension had mellowed into a strange blend of quiet excitement and profound loneliness. The radio played softly, a forgotten melody, a quiet companion in the cavern of my thoughts. I wondered if Aunt Beatrice had ever driven this road, if she'd felt the same pull of destiny, or if this isolation was simply her natural state. Hours blurred into a single, seamless stretch. My phone, once a constant source of pings and notifications, remained silent in the passenger seat, a relic of a life already receding. I hadn't called anyone, not really. What would I say? "Hey, just driving to the middle of nowhere to live in a potentially haunted house for 6 months because my reclusive great-aunt, who barely acknowledged my existence, left me millions." The absurdity of it was still a raw, open wound. Instead, I let the silence fill the car, occasionally punctuated by the hum of the engine and the soft whisper of the wind against the windows. As the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of fiery orange and soft violet, the landscape shifted again. The trees grew taller, denser, casting long, dark shadows that seemed to swallow the light. The road narrowed, becoming less maintained, twisting and turning with a mysterious intent. Signs of civilization dwindled, replaced by decaying barns and forgotten fields. It felt as if I was driving not just into the countryside, but into the past, into a forgotten corner of the world. Then, through a break in the trees, I saw it. Not the house yet, but the gates. 2 towering pillars of weathered stone, crumbling at the edges, adorned with rusted iron gates that looked as if they hadn't been opened in decades. They were imposing, ancient, almost forbidding. A sense of unease, sharp and cold, pricked at my skin. This wasn't just a property, it was a fortress, guarding something. The long, winding driveway stretched beyond, disappearing into the dark embrace of the forest. I pulled the car to a halt, the engine cutting out, leaving an oppressive silence. The air outside was cool and still, thick with the scent of damp earth and old pine. Reaching for the heavy, ornate key Mr. Finch had given me, I felt a tremor run through my hand. It was even more substantial than I remembered, cool against my skin, its intricate patterns feeling almost alive under my fingertips. This was it, the threshold. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching under my boots, the only sound in the vast stillness. The gate was even more formidable up close, adorned with thorny vines that had twisted and grown into an impenetrable mesh. How was I supposed to get in? My eyes scanned for a latch, a mechanism, anything. Then, from the shadow of the gatehouse nestled beside the pillars, a figure emerged, tall, gaunt, with a long gray beard and eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of the ancient woods. Silas Thorne. He walked with a slow, deliberate pace, his gaze steady, unblinking, as if he'd been expecting me for a very long time. His clothes were practical, worn, blending with the muted tones of the forest. No smile, no immediate greeting, just an intense, quiet presence. My unease spiked, a knot tightening in my stomach. This was the man who had known Aunt Beatrice, who shared her reclusive nature. He carried a heavy-duty bolt cutter in one hand, not a key. "Miss Hayes?" His voice was surprisingly soft, a low rumble, like distant thunder. It held no discernible emotion, just a flat acknowledgement. "You've arrived." He nodded towards the gate. "The lock broke years ago. The new one. Well, Beatrice didn't believe in frivolous repairs. I'll cut it for you." He raised the cutter, its steel jaws glinting in the fading light, and with a surprisingly swift motion, snipped the chain that bound the gates shut. The clang echoed through the silent woods, a harsh final sound that felt like the snapping of my old life. The gate swung inward with a groan, revealing the shadowed, tree-lined path beyond. It was an invitation and a warning, all at once. Silas gestured for me to drive through, his expression unreadable. I got back into my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. As I slowly drove past him, through the newly opened gates, I glanced in my rearview mirror. He hadn't moved. He simply stood there, a silent sentinel, watching me disappear into the deepening gloom of Blackwood Manor's embrace. I was truly on my own now. The long, winding driveway seemed to stretch on forever, a dark, serpentine path swallowed by towering, ancient oaks whose branches intertwined overhead, forming a perpetual twilight. Their gnarled limbs clawed at the fading light, creating shifting patterns on the gravel path. The air grew colder, heavier, infused with the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else, a faint, almost metallic tang, like old iron. My headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating fleeting glimpses of moss-covered stones and forgotten garden ornaments, half hidden by overgrown bushes. The silence pressed in, absolute and profound, broken only by the crunch of tires. Every turn brought the same endless corridor of trees and a creeping sense of being utterly disconnected from the world I knew. Then, abruptly, the trees receded, parting like a vast, dark curtain, and Blackwood Manor materialized from the deepening shadows. It was less a house and more a monolithic presence, a sprawling, dark Victorian behemoth that seemed to rise organically from the very ground it occupied. 3 stories tall, with a steeply pitched roof, countless gables, and an unsettling array of blank staring windows, it was constructed of dark, unyielding stone that absorbed the last vestiges of daylight. A wide, decaying porch wrapped around its front, adorned with intricate, crumbling woodwork. It didn't look merely old, it looked forgotten, like a sleeping giant slowly succumbing to the forest's embrace. I parked the car, its engine dying with a final shudder that felt like a sigh. The silence returned, more potent now, amplifying the rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. As I stepped out, the chill bit deeper, carrying with it a faint, indefinable smell. Not unpleasant, but alien, like dust motes from a century past. Silas Thorne was already there, waiting by the porch steps, as if he had simply materialized from the shadows of the house itself. His gaunt frame seemed to blend with the deepening twilight, his eyes, dark and knowing, fixed on me. "Miss Hayes," he said, his voice as soft and rumbling as before, carrying no inflection of welcome or surprise. "I'll show you inside." He didn't wait for my response, turning and moving towards the imposing, intricately carved front door. It was made of thick, dark wood, studded with iron, and looked heavy enough to withstand a siege. He fumbled with a ring of keys, selecting one and inserting it into the vast, ornate lock. The click echoed with an unnatural loudness in the stillness. The door swung inward with a groan that seemed to come from the very bones of the house. A wave of cold, stagnant air washed over me, carrying the distinct scent of must, dust, and something else. A faint, lingering sweetness, like old potpourri mixed with the faint tang of decay. It was the smell of a place long undisturbed, a place where time had settled, layer upon layer. The entryway was vast and dim, illuminated only by the faint light filtering through dusty, leaded glass windows high above. Heavy, dark furniture loomed, draped in white sheets like ghostly sentinels. "The main living areas have been aired out," Silas said, his voice cutting through the thick quiet. He didn't turn to look at me, but gestured with a lean hand towards the cavernous space. "The electricity and water are functional. I've stocked the pantry with some essentials." His words were pragmatic, yet delivered with a strange detachment, as if discussing chores rather than welcoming a new resident. My eyes struggled to adjust to the dimness, catching glimpses of faded wallpaper and towering, unlit fireplaces. This wasn't just a house, it was a museum of a life, untouched, and perhaps untamed. "Thank you, Silas," I managed, my voice sounding small and reedy in the immense space. I hugged my arms to myself, not just from the cold, but from the sudden, overwhelming sensation of being utterly out of my depth. "It's bigger than I imagined." He gave a non-committal grunt, already moving further into the house, his soft, worn boots making barely a sound on the dusty wooden floor. He seemed to glide, a shadow within shadows, utterly at home in this echoing monument to a forgotten past. I followed him, my own footsteps feeling clumsy and intrusive. The air grew colder with every step, and I had the distinct impression that the house itself was breathing, a slow, ancient inhale and exhale. The furniture, still draped, looked like petrified figures under their white shrouds, watching me from the periphery of my vision. This was a place saturated with history, with memories, with the lingering presence of a woman I barely knew, yet who had chosen this place, and now me, to carry on her legacy. The letter, Mr. Finch had said, was to be read here. I wondered, with a shiver, if Aunt Beatrice was somehow still listening. I followed him, my own footsteps feeling clumsy and intrusive. The air grew colder with every step, and I had the distinct impression that the house itself was breathing, a slow, ancient inhale and exhale. The furniture, still draped, looked like petrified figures under their white shrouds, watching me from the periphery of my vision. This was a place saturated with history, with memories, with the lingering presence of a woman I barely knew, yet who had chosen this place, and now me, to carry on her legacy. The letter, Mr. Finch had said, was to be read here. I wondered, with a shiver, if Aunt Beatrice was somehow still listening. Silas led me through a grand hallway, the ceiling soaring impossibly high, adorned with cobweb-draped chandeliers. Doors, heavy and dark, lined either side, each one a potential entrance to another forgotten world. He stopped at the third door on the left, pushing it open to reveal a room slightly less dim than the rest of the house, thanks to a large bay window overlooking a tangle of overgrown rose bushes. "This was her sitting room," he stated, his voice devoid of intonation. "She spent most of her time in here towards the end." The room was not draped. A plush but faded velvet armchair sat by the window, a small, intricate tapestry hanging on the wall beside it. A mahogany writing desk, cluttered with stacks of yellowed books and a half-finished game of solitaire, occupied the center of the room. It felt more personal, less a museum, but still overwhelmingly heavy with the weight of Beatrice's solitary existence. A faint scent of lavender and old paper clung to the air. Her sitting room? I repeated, my gaze drawn to the desk. It felt like an invitation, a tangible link to the woman who had brought me here. Did she always play solitaire? Silas, who had remained by the doorway, turned his head slightly, his dark eyes meeting mine. His expression was as unreadable as ever, but there was a flicker, a fleeting recognition in their depths. Sometimes, he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Often she just sat, thinking. He paused, then gestured towards the desk. The letter is there, on the desk, under the ledger. My heart gave a sudden lurch. The letter. The key to this entire bewildering inheritance. It was right there, within reach, after all this time and travel. I walked towards the desk, my hands trembling slightly as I reached for the thick, leather-bound ledger he indicated. Its cover was worn smooth, its pages filled with neat, spidery handwriting, Beatrice's. Beneath it, just as Silas had said, was a pristine, cream-colored envelope, sealed with a broken wax stamp. My name, Emma Hayes, was written across it in elegant, looping script. The very act of holding it, feeling the texture of the paper, was profoundly intimate. She wanted you to read it alone, Silas continued, his voice softer now, almost empathetic. After you'd spent some time here, to feel the house as she called it. He paused, his gaze sweeping around the room. She believed it would speak to you. My eyes darted to his, searching for a deeper meaning. He was an enigma, but there was an honesty in his quiet pronouncements. The house speak to me? I asked, a nervous laugh escaping me. It sounded like something out of a fairy tale, or perhaps a warning. What do you mean, Silas? He finally stepped into the room, his gaze now fixed on the tapestry on the wall. It depicted a dark, dense forest, strangely familiar, with a single twisted oak tree at its center. The manor has its own memory, he stated, his voice flat but firm. Beatrice said only those meant to stay here could hear it, or feel it. She said you would know. He then turned, his figure silhouetted against the open doorway. I'll leave you now, Miss Hayes. Your room is down the hall, first on the right. I've laid out some fresh linens. And with that, he was gone, his soft footsteps fading down the long hallway, leaving me utterly alone in the quiet, breathing house, the letter heavy in my hand. The silence that enveloped me was immediate, total, and profound. The kind of silence that amplifies every subtle creak of old wood, every rustle of leaves outside, every beat of my own heart. I was alone, truly alone, in this sprawling, ancient house, hundreds of miles from anything familiar. My gaze returned to the letter, then to the vast, dark forest depicted in the tapestry. Was that a stylized representation of the land outside, the hundreds of acres Aunt Beatrice had bequeathed? The twisted oak seemed almost alive, its branches reaching, beckoning. A strange mix of fear and an exhilarating anticipation bubbled within me. This wasn't just an inheritance, it was an initiation. Aunt Beatrice hadn't just left me a fortune. She'd left me a test, a puzzle, and perhaps a secret. Her reclusiveness, her eccentricities, the strange conditions of the will, it all coalesced into a potent, unsettling mystery. I placed the letter carefully back on the desk, not ready to break its seal yet. I needed to understand this place first, to feel its pulse, to let it speak to me, just as Silas had implied. The first step, I decided, was to explore, to walk its hallowed halls, to listen. The silence that had settled upon me was not just the absence of sound, but a thick, palpable presence, almost a living thing. I stood there, the weight of the sealed letter in my hand, feeling the house breathe around me. It was cold, yes, but not a hostile cold, more like the quiet chill of ancient stone, holding secrets within its very mortar. All right, Beatrice, I whispered, my voice swallowed instantly by the vastness. If you want me to listen, then I will. Setting the letter carefully back onto the desk, I began to walk, my footsteps echoing faintly on the polished floorboards. I moved from the sitting room into the grand hallway, then instinctively turned left, towards what appeared to be the formal dining room. It was immense, a dark expanse dominated by a long, heavy table draped in white, like a ghostly banquet. Cobwebs clung to the chandelier, shimmering faintly in the twilight filtering through tall windows. Imagine the dinners here, I murmured to myself, picturing a bustling scene, impossible in this quiet mausoleum. Or maybe none at all. Beyond the dining room, I found a library. My breath caught. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined every wall, laden with thousands of volumes. The air here was different, thick with the scent of aged paper and leather, a comforting, scholarly aroma. A large, ornate globe stood in one corner, and a worn armchair invited me to sit. This was a place of contemplation, of endless stories. So much knowledge, I thought aloud, running my fingers over the spine of a leather-bound book. Did you read all of these, Aunt Beatrice, or just collect them? The silence was her only answer. I continued my exploration upstairs, the grand staircase groaning softly under my weight with each step. The second floor was a labyrinth of closed doors. Each handle I touched was cold, some rusted shut, others stiff with disuse. Most rooms were still covered in white sheets, silent monuments to a life frozen in time. I found what Silas had described as my room, first on the right, and indeed, fresh linens were neatly folded on a large four-poster bed. A heavy, velvet-draped window overlooked the front grounds, and through the murky glass, I could see the towering ancient oaks, their shadows long and skeletal in the fading light. This is it, then, I said, not to anyone, but to the room, to the air itself. My new home, for 6 months at least. The words felt hollow, a provisional statement. I ran my hand over the dark wood of the dresser. It was solid, well-crafted, but also steeped in an undeniable sense of the past. What stories do these walls hold? I wondered, leaning against the cool plaster. What did Beatrice do here, all those years? The house felt like a living entity, its stillness not empty but pregnant with suppressed sound. I could almost hear the whispers of former residents, the rustle of Beatrice's skirts as she walked these very floors. The air in some rooms felt lighter, in others, a heavy, almost sorrowful weight. It was an overwhelming sensory experience, far beyond anything I'd encountered in my structured modern life. This wasn't just an old house, it was a memory keeper, a silent observer of a forgotten life. My eyes fell upon a small, intricate locket lying on the bedside table, not covered by a sheet. It was silver, tarnished with age, etched with delicate floral patterns. It was open, revealing 2 tiny faded photographs. One was of a young, stern-looking woman, Beatrice, undoubtedly, in her youth. But the other was of a small girl, no older than 5, with wide, curious eyes and a shy smile. Her features were strikingly similar to my own, a ghostly echo of my own childhood photographs. My heart leaped. "Who are you?" I whispered, picking up the locket, my fingers tracing the girl's image. "Is this a relative? A forgotten sister?" The locket was cool in my palm, a fragile bridge connecting me to a past I knew nothing about. It was the kind of intimate object I'd expected at the will reading, yet here it was, discovered in the quiet solitude of Beatrice's vast home, untouched for who knows how long. It felt like a deliberate breadcrumb, left for me to find. Just then, a faint creak echoed from the hallway outside, a sound that wasn't quite a settling house but something more deliberate. I stiffened, my gaze darting to the open doorway. "Silas?" I called out, my voice a little too loud, a little too shaky. No response. Only the deep, abiding silence of Blackwood Manor. Was it the house speaking to me, as Silas had suggested, or was someone else here? The feeling of isolation, which had been a quiet hum, now flared into a sharp, undeniable alarm. I was not alone here. I could feel it. My breath hitched, and the silence stretched, thin and brittle. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. "Silas?" I called again, louder this time, my voice cracking slightly. The name echoed, then died, swallowed by the vast, unlit spaces beyond the open doorway. No answering rustle, no soft footsteps, just the deep, profound stillness of the manor. Was it the settling of old timber, a trick of the wind, or something else entirely? The air, already cool, seemed to drop a few degrees, raising goosebumps on my arms. I forced myself to walk to the doorway, peering into the shadowy hallway, but saw nothing but the endless stretch of darkness. My imagination was playing tricks, surely. It had to be. I returned to the bedside table, my hand still clutching the locket, its silver cool against my heated palm. The image of the small girl stared up at me, her eyes so eerily familiar. This wasn't just a random antique, it felt like a direct message, a breadcrumb dropped by Beatrice herself. "Who are you, little one?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The more I looked, the more convinced I became that her features, particularly the slight curve of her nose and the shape of her jaw, mirrored my own childhood photos. Could this be a forgotten family secret? A child no one spoke of? This small, tangible object, so personal and unexpected, shifted something fundamental within me. The house, previously an intimidating, overwhelming monument, now felt less like a burden and more like a puzzle. Beatrice hadn't just thrown a golden cage at me, she'd given me a quest, a personal one. This locket was the first clue. It wasn't about money anymore, not really. It was about understanding, about unearthing the hidden layers of a life, a family, I barely knew. I sat on the edge of the large four-poster bed, the fresh linens soft beneath me, and continued to gaze at the locket. It was a stark contrast to the opulence of the will reading, the cold formality of Mr. Finch's office, and even the foreboding exterior of Blackwood Manor. This was delicate, intimate, and deeply human. Why would she leave this here, for me to find, knowing its significance? I pondered aloud, directing the question to the silent room, to Beatrice's lingering presence. It was a deliberate act, not just an oversight. The earlier fear about the creek began to dissipate, replaced by a surge of determined curiosity. The thought of being alone here, initially terrifying, now felt strangely appropriate. This investigation, this unraveling of Beatrice's final narrative, needed a quiet space, an undisturbed mind. My urban life, with its constant distractions and demands, wouldn't have allowed for this kind of deep dive. She had engineered this isolation, almost as a condition for me to truly hear her story. "She believed it would speak to you," Silas had said, his words echoing in my mind. Was this little girl the voice of the house? A tangible piece of its history, something Beatrice wanted me to discover? It felt like the house was less a haunted mansion and more a vast, intricate memory box, its secrets slowly revealing themselves as I settled in. I closed the locket, its tiny clasp clicking softly, securing the faces within. It felt like a promise. My phone, a beacon of my old life, lay forgotten in my bag downstairs. Here there was only the vast expanse of time and the weight of history. I knew I wouldn't sleep much tonight. My mind was buzzing, not with anxiety, but with questions, with a nascent excitement. This wasn't just a 6-month residency anymore. It was an exploration, an archaeological dig into the past of a woman whose choices continued to ripple through generations. "Okay, Aunt Beatrice," I whispered, looking around the dim room, imagining her here, a young woman, perhaps holding this very locket. "I'm listening. Tell me your story." The house didn't answer with a voice, but with a profound, knowing silence that seemed to hold 1,000 unspoken words. It was a quiet invitation to unravel its mysteries, starting with the enigmatic little girl who looked so much like me. The first layer had been peeled back, revealing a deeper, far more personal intrigue than I could have ever anticipated. The locket, cool in my palm, felt less like an object, more a whisper across generations. Beatrice hadn't just left me a fortune. She'd spun a thread, binding me to this forgotten place, offering a story. My initial resentment, the feeling of being trapped, softened into a strange gratitude, a profound purpose. The house, once a cage, now felt like an intricate, waiting diary. I traced the tiny girl's image, her eyes mirroring my own. Was she the key to Beatrice's eccentric choices? The millions now felt like mere stage dressing. Beatrice, despite her reclusiveness, yearned for connection, a final, significant imparting. She didn't want just an heir, she wanted me to understand. As night deepened, the house settled into profound stillness. A silence unlike any I'd known, rich with centuries of echoes. No city hum, just the creak of old timbers, the wind's soft brush. It wasn't empty. It was full, saturated with untold narratives, waiting for me to simply listen. I moved to the window, peering into the inky blackness. The moon, a pale sliver, rose, bathing the ancient, gnarled oaks in ghostly light. Their branches, skeletal against the sky, formed intricate, living patterns. I saw the twisted oak from Beatrice's tapestry, stark and powerful, a silent guardian. A striking image, unnerving yet beautiful, a symbol of enduring mystery. Beatrice's presence, once a tangible weight, now diffused. Not a ghost, but a lingering essence, a whisper in the wind, a memory held in dancing dust motes. She was here, woven into Blackwood Manor, her story patiently awaiting its unraveling. In that moment, gazing at the moonlit trees, a quiet understanding bloomed. Life, I realized, isn't just about accumulation, but what you leave behind. Forged connections, whispered stories, hidden legacies. This house, this land, this strange inheritance, transcended property. It was a bridge to a past I needed to understand, a call to uncover the truth, not just about her, but myself. The journey had just begun,